Welcome. My name is Kramer. This is the CramerSez podcast. It's been a while. It's been about 4 months since we've done a new podcast. For the last several months, I've been working on a number of campaigns, worked on a congressional campaign, worked on my own campaign, some successful, some not. But with that being said, we are back. The podcast will return next Monday. What we're going to do over the next week or so is start to push forward material that we haven't been able to talk about or showcase, but we think is really important. So what we'd like you to do is listen for the next week. These will be programs priming us for what's going to happen on Monday, May 20th. We'll have interviews, we've got news, and we've got action plans on how to get you involved. That's probably the most important. Things that you can do to get involved before the 2024 election because of what happened in 2020. We'll also show you how to create liberty groups in your own area. We'll be talking to people around the country from liberty groups, constitutional groups, militias, and so on how to exercise your constitutional rights. The authority that these people are talking about that they think that they have, they don't. It's clear in the Constitution. We'll also get into that today. And then next Monday, we have a major announcement. All I can say about it is this. We've been working on this for a long time, and we're very close to the end, but we're going to need your help to make it come to fruition 100%. So we'll be announcing that next Monday. Coming up on the show, we're going to show you how to get informed and educated, how you can form local groups, constitutional classes. Have you ever taken one? Do you know what your rights are? Do you know them to the core of your being? If you don't, they'll use that against you. They'll use your ignorance against you, and that's what they've been doing to the American people for a number of years. So it's time that we get this back under control, and the best way to do that is for you to go to a constitutional class to understand exactly what the rules are of the playground. I've been saying it for a long time. Life isn't any more difficult than what we experienced on the playground. You just have to know the rules. By the way, the classes are free. You don't have to pay for them. And it gets you into a network of people that are like-minded. You might find people in your community are just as interested as you are in these things, and you had no idea. You thought you were out there alone? Well, you're not. There's a lot of people. What we're going to start doing is getting you guys together. In addition, we're going to be talking to preppers, people who look at the future and say, well, based on what we're seeing right now, it might be wise to start saving some food back. We'll show you how to do that. We'll talk to you about how much you should have, etc., as well as news and views of the day. On the show today, John Eastman. You might know his name. He's Trump's former defense attorney. He breaks down the 2020 election state by state on all the fraud that happened, state by state. It's a great presentation, and we can't wait to get into it. We'll do that right after this.
America's political prisoners need our help.
CramerSez is on a mission to raise $100,000 or more.
Can you help? Join our mission today
at CramerSez.shop.
You're watching CramerSez.
Thank you all. Thank you. Well, when I called Ron and said maybe it'd be nice to get together with a few people, I thought, a little dinner. I didn't know we'd have 100 or 200 people show up. Thank you. This energizes me beyond measure. Thank you all so much. I start this story when I get a call from the White House switchboard. I thought they were joking. I thought it was an old buddy of mine saying the president's on the line. Can you take a call? I said, Steve, what are you doing? Get off the phone. And the president said, I'd like you to represent me. We're trying to get an action before the Supreme Court of the United States. That normally is something that would be considered the capstone of one's career. My daughter thought so. She took the brief we filed in the Supreme Court, my motion to intervene on behalf of the president in the Texas versus Pennsylvania case. She had it framed and gave it to me for Christmas that year. It still adorns my shelf at home. But a funny thing happened on the way to the forum, as the old line says. Because apparently in 21st century America, you're not supposed to challenge the status quo. You're not supposed to challenge what government tells you, no matter how blatantly false it manifestly is. When they said, masks should be worn or masks shouldn't be worn, we're supposed to act like they didn't change their mind and that it was equally the same. When they tell you it's okay to have 50-year-old men showing up naked in your daughter's showers, we're supposed to just say, well, this is the government said this is okay. Or competing against your daughters in the swim meet. What's she going to do when she grows up and wants to get a scholarship swimming or running track and she's competing against a man? It's not fair. It's not American. And we need to stand up against it. And the same thing's true with elections. Bill Barr said that there was no evidence of fraud. He looked. Except when we filed Public Records Act requests asking what he looked at, getting access to the investigatory materials that he based that statement on. Now, investigative materials are exempt from FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, and what you get back normally, it says, yes, we have such materials, but it's exempt under whatever subsection of the statute it's exempt under. That was not the message that came back. There was a fellow that filed FOIA requests in every swing state U.S. Attorney's Office and in Maine Justice in Washington asking for all the investigative materials that supported Bill Barr's statement. And the answer didn't come back. We have these materials and they're exempt. The message, the letter came back and it said, there are no such materials. In other words, what Bill Barr said was a lie.
Right.
And publicly, he's saying we're investigating election illegality. Privately, as we know from the U.S. Attorney in Pennsylvania, Bill McSwain, he was separately calling him, saying, stand down. Hand the materials over to the Attorney General of Pennsylvania. Think about that. The Democrats in Philadelphia are stealing an election. You're going to hand it over to the Democrat Attorney General to conduct the investigation. In other words, the investigation that occurred. The head of CISA said it was the most secure election in history. I mean, you can't even say that with a straight face. I tried to sell that storyline to Hollywood. They turned it down as too implausible. No, I'm kidding. So, an article I just recently published based on a speech I gave at the Gatestone Institute in New York some months back called, in quotes, the most secure election in history. I didn't even have to put a question mark after it. Everybody knew how laughable it was. My job was to focus on the illegality, and I want to lay out the basic constitutional premise here. Article 2 of the Constitution is so clearly written that even lawyers should be able to understand it. It says that the states shall, in the manner chosen, shall choose the manner, I'm sorry, I'm drawing a blank on the precise language. The states shall choose the presidential electors in the manner directed by the legislature of the state. The legislatures decide how presidential electors are going to be chosen. In the first half century of our nation's history, most of the state legislatures just chose the president-elect themselves. You can imagine what those campaigns for state legislative office were like. It took on a whole new meaning every 4 years because whoever got in office would be the ones choosing the presidential electors from that state. Since the Civil War, all of the states, Colorado when it first entered chose its own electors by the legislature, but since the Civil War, all the states have chosen electors in the manner by having a popular vote. And what that means is the election code, how you conduct that election, becomes the manner for choosing presidential electors. And under that constitutional assignment of authority, plenary power, the Supreme Court has said, to the state legislators, only the legislature can alter that manner. Only the legislature can decide whether we're going to get rid of signature verification or water it down. Only the legislature can decide whether we can have drop boxes or human drop boxes. Only the legislature can decide we're not going to have bipartisan teams going into the nursing homes as Wisconsin required. Only the legislature can decide we're not going to bother making sure we have bipartisan teams at every counting table in TCF Center. The decisions to alter those state election laws by county clerks, by secretaries of state, even in some instances by state court judges, were not only an illegal thing under state election law, but because we're dealing with a federal election whose power to design that system comes from the federal Constitution, those actions were unconstitutional. That alone made the election invalid. I don't have to prove fraud. Politically, you want to say, and it affected more votes than the outcome, because you don't want to rest on a technicality here. But we know that the door opened by that illegality to fraud had people walk through it in significant enough numbers to have affected the outcome of the elections, and at least enough of the swing states to have affected overall the outcome of the total election. In Wisconsin, the Secretary of State there prohibited the mandatory bipartisan teams from going into nursing homes. Why do we have bipartisan teams as part of the law in Wisconsin? Because people in nursing homes tend to be particularly susceptible to undue influence. And we don't want that undue influence affecting their right to vote. So you have bipartisan teams going to make sure that doesn't happen. She prohibited it, claimed it was because of COVID. The fish tank cleaners, I'm told, are still allowed to go in, but not the bipartisan teams to secure honesty in the vote from those nursing homes. That opened the door for fraud. It was one of the main checks against fraud that the legislature had directed, and it was ignored by the Secretary of State without any constitutional authority. How do we know people walked through that door of fraud? Well, turnout rates in the nursing homes in Wisconsin went from a historical average of 20 to 30% to nearly 100%, including in memory care wings of the nursing homes. And many of the ballots were in the same handwriting. There's no evidence of fraud. How many have heard that? That alone affected more ballots than the margin of victory in Wisconsin, which was just over 20,000. Another thing which the courts have subsequently held was illegal in Wisconsin was drop boxes. There's no statutory authority for drop boxes. And in Wisconsin, they not only put drop boxes in heavily Democratic areas, they put human drop boxes. That was a clever way of. They ran an operation called Democracy in the Park, which was a ballot harvesting operation for college students in Madison, Wisconsin, where the University of Wisconsin is. In that one operation, over 2 Saturdays leading up to the election, they collected illegally 17,500 votes. The margin was 20,600 and something. That's just that one operation. These things have subsequently been held to be illegal. And yet people continue to insist that I am, what's the phrase they use in the California bar proceeding? I'm exhibiting moral turpitude because I continue to insist that there was illegality in the conduct of the election.
Kramer Says.
We'll be right back after these messages.
Kramer Says is everywhere.
Twitter, Truth, Instagram,
And always on America's fastest growing free speech platform.
Kramer Says Social.
Make your free account today
At CramerSez.com.
CramerSez.com.
You're watching
Kramer Says.
Georgia, they ran what I call porta potty precincts all over town in Atlanta. They created portable precincts. Now, that violated several laws in Georgia. The precincts have to be fixed, and you have to notify people ahead of time where they're going to be. I don't think they ever provided notice of what the route of the portable precinct was going to be. It makes it very difficult to have the observers. Violated the law. The Secretary of State there entered into a consent decree months before the election that completely obliterated, watered down the signature verification process. So much so that in Fulton County, they didn't even bother to try even the watered down signature verification process. They admitted that in one of the cases down there. That was all illegal, and it affected many more votes than the 11,779 vote margin in Georgia. In Pennsylvania, to this day, there are 120,000 more ballots cast than voters. Think about that for a minute. It kind of lends credence to the story that supposedly was debunked about the truck driver who said, I trucked in 200,000 ballots from Long Island to Philadelphia, and I don't know what happened to them. 120,000 more ballots than people voted. In my bar trial, the Deputy Secretary of State testified and said, well, you don't know what you're talking about because those numbers are based on the current data in the voter rolls, and that number constantly changes as people die or move out of state. It's reduced. So Heather Honey, who heads the voter integrity operation in Pennsylvania, told me how many people from election day to February, when Philadelphia and Pittsburgh had finally finished uploading their numbers so we could compare apples and apples. She said there were only 16,000 people that had been dropped from the rolls over those 4 months. So he lied when he said that that was the explanation for the 120,000 disparity. I said, if we'd been allowed to call Heather as a rebuttal witness, she would have said, well, 16,000. That means 120 minus 16, high calculated math. Okay, still 104,000 more ballots than votes. That's a problem in a state where the margin was 80,000. In Georgia, they got access. I think this particular judge didn't get the memo that you're not supposed to let people look at the machines. The case is Favorito versus Raffensperger. And a judge in Fulton County gave them access and discovery to conduct a forensic audit on one machine, and they had it about a week before the judge withdrew the order. And in that week, they discovered some very interesting things, such as, this is a little complicated, so let me explain it. Think about what happened in 2020 that had never really happened before. Normally, you go to your local school or the local church and you vote in your precinct. And the few people that would vote by mail, those votes would get delivered to that precinct, and they'd be counted together with the in-person votes, and then that precinct's total would be reported to the county and then to the state. Well, in the big cities, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Detroit, they decided to consolidate all of the mail-in ballots all in one place and count them all there. And that means in Atlanta, you had ballots coming in from 490 different precincts all over the county. And every precinct has a different ballot. Because every precinct has different school boards, has different city council races, and so the ballots have to have a key code to tell the counting machine what key to look to decide how to count those bubbles on your ballot. And what they discovered in this forensic audit, you run 490 different precincts in random to create a batch to scan of 100. We got any mathematicians there? That means 100 to the 490th power is the odds that that same sequence would be replicated. In other words, zero possibility of a replication of the exact sequence of that 100. They found in that 1 week on that one machine over 5,000 ballots that were in the same identical sequence. In other words, the ballots are being scanned multiple times and counted multiple times, or they're being scanned once and replicated and counted multiple times. And just yesterday, in the Georgia Board of Elections hearing, they identified this problem as well as several others, like 600,000 some ballots that there's no ballot image for. In Mesa County, Colorado, again, somebody she's about to suffer a felony trial for doing this, but they were going to update the software in the machines in her county, all over the state, per order of the Secretary of State. And she said, that's illegal, because that update is going to destroy election data. And under federal law, we have to keep all election data for 22 months. And I'm the one who's on the hook if that data isn't preserved, because I'm the county clerk, the chief elections officer in my county. If that data is not preserved, I could go to jail. So she makes a mirror image copy of the machine data before they do the update, which destroys the data. And now she's got this thing, and she gives it to the forensic scientist to have a look. And they discovered that packets of vote data were deleted and the new ones uploaded in their place. But Mr. CramerSez this is the most secure election in history. Here in Michigan, of course, you started all this stuff with Antrim County. Matt McCarroll did a great job. I think it was very clever. Let's look at the school board race or whatever it was, because nobody will pay attention there. Everybody's focused on the presidential race. We'll get a judge to say, yeah, you can look at the machines. And he discovered, lo and behold, votes cast for Trump were recorded as for Biden. And maybe there's an explanation on the update and whatever. I mean, I think Mr. Haldeman kind of backed out and reverse engineered what happened, and that seems to make a lot of sense. But both of them identified in the course of their review unbelievable security breaches. They're still using the same password for admins that is the way everybody accesses it, and it's been in place since 2008. Hasn't changed, and with that password you can get into the system. Haldeman has been going around the world for a decade or more raising these kind of questions until the people that were concerned about it were on the other side of the political aisle from him, and now he thinks it's all perfect. He was the guy who testified down in Georgia in the curling litigation, where they're going to throw out the use of the machines down there. But then they kept his report under seal for a long time, and it came out and it showed security breaches. They found a Wi-Fi chip on the motherboard of the machine in Antrim County. And I think I recall seeing a news account that your Attorney General was going to prosecute DeBurnham and his team for planting evidence. Except he had already obtained in discovery a copy of the invoice that had a line item for the Wi-Fi chip. In Georgia, in Coffee County, they had a problem, and the local tech on site walks out of the room and calls the home office, and they fix the problem remotely. And I just have a simple question: how do they do that if it's not connected to the internet? Anyway, and if it's not connected to the internet, I want to know what kind of communication system they've got that I don't know about, because that sounds pretty good. Maybe it works better than Verizon. I don't know. These are the kind of things we know. And it means that the illegality, the ignoring of state statutes that were designed to make it difficult to do those kind of things, open the door for fraud, and people with a lot at stake walk through that door. Now, let me talk about what's happened for anybody that dares stand up to this. What is it? It's often attributed to George Orwell. I don't know if he ever actually said it, but it certainly fits with the kind of things he would have said. In an era of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act.
Kramer Says.
We'll be right back after these messages.
America's political prisoners need our help.
CramerSez is on a mission to raise $100,000 or more.
Can you help? Join our mission today
At CramerSez.shop.
You're watching Kramer Says.
I like to make a different comparison. The English used to have a law on seditious libel. It's one of the reasons we fought a Revolutionary War. If you criticized the government, you could be prosecuted for seditious libel. And if what you said was true, that didn't matter. Truth was not a defense, because the greater the truth, the greater the libel. In other words, if what you were saying and criticizing the government was true, it brought them into greater disrepute, and we needed to prosecute you more. That, ladies and gentlemen, I fear, is the step we've taken in this country. People that are simply shining a light on what went on and telling the truth about it are essentially being accused of seditious libel. I'm unindicted co-conspirator number 2 in D.C. I'm indicted co-conspirator number 3 in Georgia. And last week, I get indicted in Arizona. I had 0 communications with the electors in Arizona. I had 0 involvement with the election challenges in Arizona. I responded to a request from a legislator to talk to the Speaker of the Assembly for about 5 minutes. That was it. And yet I'm indicted co-conspirator number 13 in Arizona. I was a little hesitant to come to Michigan because I know what's going on here with that there. Let me send a message to your Attorney General. I had 0 communications with your electors. In fact, I've now met one elector just tonight, about 4 years after the election. I had 0 involvement with the Michigan litigation. And I think I had maybe 2 5-minute conversations with a couple of lawyers here in Michigan, because my focus was in Pennsylvania and in Georgia, who was not here. So if you decide you want to add me to that indictment of the electors, I would call that malicious prosecution. Yeah. At some point, we've got to start pushing back and holding people to account for these fraudulent. So, when the indictment started coming down, my lawyer, the first lawyer, the criminal defense lawyer I had to hire to deal with the completely bipartisan, neutral January 6th committee in the House of the criminal defense lawyers always tell their clients, right out of the box, don't say a word. Don't say a word, it'll be used against you. And I understand that's the right advice in almost all circumstances. But I also understood before he did that these are not normal circumstances. that the battles I'm dealing with have precious little to do with the actual law. These are political battles, and for me not to be out speaking means I am ceding the turf on the only battlefield that matters, which is the court of public opinion. And it took him a couple of months to come around to that view, but he agreed, and now I do interviews all the time now, even with hostile press, even with 60 Minutes, even with all sorts of things. Because the American people need to have a light shined at what went on. Because if they don't, it'll go on again and again, and elections will cease to matter in this country. And as Patrice pointed out, the reason that is so important comes straight from our Declaration of Independence. All men, all human beings are created equal. That's the fundamental self-evident truth set out in that document. The corollary truths that means nobody gets to rule others without their consent. The only legitimate form of government is one based on consent. Our forebears gave that consent by ratifying the Constitution. We give that consent every 4 years or every 2 years by a fair election. We still are the sovereign authority in this country, and the government works for us, not the other way around. Right. And if those elections are conducted illegally, they are not fair by definition. We no longer are being governed by the consent of the governed. We cease to be a free people, free citizens in a self-governing republic, and we become subjects of an increasingly oppressive or tyrannical government. This is the fight for our time. It is a fight comparable to the fight our founders waged against the greatest empire on earth at the time. They pledged to each other their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor, and many of them gave one or the other of those, or a combination. Our grandparents fought in World War I or World War II to defend freedom here and abroad. The greatest generation, they call it. Well, this is the fight for us to stand up. Last summer, I teach summer fellowship programs at the Claremont Institute, the organization that has kept me employed after my other ones decided not to. And we have 3 fellowship programs over the summer: the Publius Fellows, the Lincoln Fellows, and the one for lawyers, recent law grads, the John Marshall Fellows. I teach a little bit on all 3 of them, but primarily in the Marshall Fellows program. And at the end of the week, and this is, it's not your normal policy thing. We teach them about the fundamental principles that underlie our country. We begin with Aristotle, and Cicero, and natural law, and we do this. And at the end of the week, we throw them a nice dinner, some good wine, and they roast and toast each other. Occasionally, they'll give it a little nod to the faculty from the week. But this year was the year that the Georgia indictment came down while I was in teaching. And so they decided to roast me a little bit. Eastman was conducting a seminar on the religion clauses with Justice Rogers Brown and Phil Munoz from Notre Dame. And black-booted thugs started rappelling down from the rooftops and came in and arrested him and parted him off. Now, they didn't do that, but it was part of the roast. It was fun. And he kept teaching about the religion clauses. He was bound and determined to get that across to us. But he said that they all drew from that an observation of courage, and that courage was contagious, and they all saw what were going on, and they decided to redouble themselves in their careers, not to stand down in the face of such oppression. The guy then turns serious, and he said, quoted a line from our Star-Spangled Banner, our national anthem. The famous question, is the flag still waving, right? And he said, if you think about it, the question is not so much about whether the flag still waves, but what kind of land it waves over. Is it still the land of the free and the home of the brave? Or is it the land of the coward and the home of the slave? I, ladies and gentlemen, am not willing to let that latter be our destiny, or the thing I bequeath to my children and grandchildren. I am going to fight for the former, because that's what we received from our forebears. And I draw such energy from groups like this because it means people are watching. And this thing happens all over the country. I was invited by the local ladies club in Palm Springs. I figured it was going to be like 20 or 30 people. They had to rent out the convention center. 400 people showed up. People are awakened to what's going on. And it's not just election, it's CRT. It's all of this crap that our government is feeding us that is just simply not true. And people are waking up saying, you're now hitting home. You're affecting my kids, my life. I go to the grocery store and it costs me $482 for a slice of bread. Whatever it is. That's not true. I don't mean to make a misrepresentation, Mr. It was an exaggeration. Ms. Madam Attorney General.
Kramer Says.
We'll be right back after these messages.
Kramer Says is everywhere
Twitter, Truth, Instagram,
and always on America's fastest growing free speech platform.
Kramer Says Social.
Make your free account today
At CramerSez.com.
CramerSez.com.
You're watching
Kramer Says.
People are waking up all over the country. Homegrown groups like this in every precinct, in every county, in every state in the country. Eyes on it, millions of eyes on what's going on. I think it's going to make it much more difficult. But we still have to be diligent.
Yes.
And then we've got to worry about the next generation because they've utterly destroyed our public school system. But one of my clients right now is a kid named Jaden Rodriguez. That name probably doesn't ring a bell, but I'll bet his story does when I tell it to you. Jaden Rodriguez is the 12-year-old who was suspended from his school because he had a Gadsden flag patch on his backpack. And his assistant principal told him he couldn't wear it because it was a symbol of slavery. And he said, no, ma'am, it's a symbol of freedom fighting against government tyranny. This 12-year-old knew more than the people that were supposed to be educating him. And more importantly, for this part of the story, he had the courage to stand up to it. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that's the kind of kid that when my time comes to pass the baton, I will be honored to pass it to him. And I think we need more kids like that, and we need to make sure that we're generating. So I draw strength from things like that. In the bleakest moments, you need to have hope, and I do. Right before Christmas, a reporter for the LA Times contacted me. They were working on a human interest story about me and my family. The story they wanted to run in the LA Times on Christmas Day was how devastated we are because I participated in the big lie and, joined with the Orange Man, and don't I regret all of this? Wouldn't it be life better if I hadn't done any of that? And I said, where are you getting that? Our country is on the precipice of losing our freedom. And for whatever reason, I've been cast in the forefront of this war. I can't think of anything more honorable to do than be participating in protecting freedom for our kids and grandkids. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
There's about 150 signs that were on your seats. One side says lawfare, the other side says election integrity. I want to make sure before we go to even some questions or some additional comment to have a picture taken. So our photographer, JB, are you here? Okay. We'd like to get a picture of you standing facing that way, you all standing up and holding those signs up from either side, because we're going to post this everywhere to let them know the people are speaking and standing with John Eastman and those like him.
Right here?
Yeah, there you go. We'll have him come up here. JD.
That's the perfect name for you.
He's getting his camera ready. That is fantastic. You caught him off guard. I know. So if you could get some photos with him. So you put your hands up and then get some pictures of all of those people. And then we can circulate them to all these organizations that talk about it. Because this will give hope to an awful lot of people.
You gotta keep going. Let's move over here. So there. All right.
Great. Keep holding them up. Keep holding them up. He's going to get a different angle with more images.
Thumbs up would be good.
Yep.
This is fantastic.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you all.
So before we close, I would really like to, were you going to do any kind of question? Do you have time for a couple questions? Okay, so go ahead, however you want to do that.
All right. So if you have questions, just raise your hand and Sherry is going to bring around the microphone, which is here, and then take some questions. Thank you.
Show of hands. Okay.
There's
Come.
one right back here.
All right, I'm coming. Leanne Kerman, my friend.
The Fulton County case where they have found that ballots have been double scanned, what is next what's going to happen next there?
Is that I missed the first part, the Georgia Board of Elections?
The Georgia Board of Elections, what's going to happen?
I saw the motion that was made. I haven't been able to catch the results of the motion, but the motion was that they determined that 17,000 votes were illegally cast, and that's more than the margin, and the election should be decertified. I don't know whether the Board of Election has enough courage to take that step or what they've done. But Mr. Rossi and Montauk that put this complaint together a couple of years ago now, I mean, it's finally seeing the light of day, and I believe it's the pulling of the thread in the sweater that's going to unravel a whole lot of stuff. We're seeing things coming out of Arizona that are just stunning. And the Arizona Supreme Court last week, 2 weeks ago now maybe, I got a little sidetracked with the indictment that got in there, but the Arizona Supreme Court reversed the sanctions against the lawyers for raising the election challenge on behalf of Kerry Lake, saying that was nonsense. They did exactly what they're supposed to do as lawyers, and this evidence is credible and it needs to be heard. I think similar things are underway here. I know they're underway in Wisconsin and in Pennsylvania. So I think the dominoes are going to start falling. And obviously it's too late to fix the last 3.5 years. But if those dominoes fall and you get courageous county DAs start bringing felony criminal prosecutions against the people that engaged in that illegal conduct, it'll be like, the IRS bringing an indictment against somebody for tax fraud the week before tax day, right? It kind of scares the bejesus out of the rest of us, right? And I think if you get both a couple of the high-ranking colonels and you get some of the rank-and-file folks that are doing this stuff and start putting them or threatening them with prison, maybe it sends a message to more broadly. One can only hope. But in the meantime, look, we signed up en masse last time to be poll watchers, and we found out what happened in TCF Center. You weren't allowed to watch. Or in Philadelphia Convention Center, the court held, you just had to be in the room. The room was 2 football fields in length, and you were allowed to be at the front entrance, and the tables where the counting was going on were 2 football fields away. I'm sure you could validate that the signatures matched from that far. Then we're poll watchers, and they weren't allowed to watch. So why not become poll workers? Right? You be the one that's doing the counting. You be the one that makes sure that the law is complied with, because you're the one complying with it, rather than watching and being silent about saying something. Things like what happened in Georgia this week should embolden us to be able to take those steps so that 3.5 years after the fact, they're not saying, yeah, this election shouldn't have been certified. We do it on the front end. We prevent the illegality on the front end. Let me see, where is it over here?
What are your thoughts on the national popular vote movement, and could that be like a real threat to the Electoral College?
Thank you. It's a great question. I think I'm still on the advisory folks opposed to the national popular vote movement. It is an end run of a constitutional mandate. I think it would be struck down as unconstitutional if it ever passes. But they are trying to get rid of the Electoral College vote, the Electoral College. The Electoral College was a brilliant design of the founders. It forces candidates to appeal to different regions and different interests in the country. It forces candidates not to be the choice of a raw mob democracy, a raw majority, but an enlightened majority that taps into the varied interests and regions of the country. You get ready to the Electoral College, LA and New York are going to decide the elections. And any idiot Republican in a state legislature that's signing on to that thing is just either naive or stupid, or really a Democrat in disguise.
CramerSez.
We'll be right back after these messages.
America's political prisoners need our help.
CramerSez is on a mission to raise $100,000 or more.
Can you help? Join our mission today
At CramerSez.shop.
CramerSez is everywhere.
Twitter, Truth,
Instagram, and always on America's fastest growing free speech platform.
CramerSez Social.
Make your free account today
At CramerSez.com.
CramerSez.com.
You're watching
CramerSez.
I don't think, the other thing about it is if they do pull it off, think about just the politics of the day. The time it's going to come into play is when the majority votes Republican instead of Democrat. And tell me how long that national popular vote compact lasts when California decides it has to cast its vote for Trump. Right, so it's unstable from the get-go, but it's also blatantly unconstitutional in my view.
John, hey, thank you so much for your talk here tonight. It's a pleasure to see you as always. You're on fire. It's wonderful to see. I want to ask you to whip out your crystal ball here for a moment. You know, you're at the center of all these investigations. The lawfare against President Trump is ongoing as we speak in New York City. Do you believe that the liberals are ready to put Trump in prison prior to the election? Do you think any of these cases they're going to try and do that? Are they that crazy?
Yes. Look, I always like to look at things with changing the fact scenario so shoes are on the other feet. So imagine a presidential campaign laundering millions of dollars through its law firm, calling it legal expenses, and hiring foreign agents to do a phony story about a Russia dossier and Russia collusion, and working with our FBI. Does that ever happen? And that was actually illegal because that was actually a campaign expenditure that they didn't properly record. And nothing ever happened to that. So that just proves that this is partisan and denial of equal protection. They will try and put Trump in jail if they can. It would be an interesting thing. There's a bill in Congress right now trying to deprive any former president who's been convicted of a crime of Secret Service protection. Because they know they got a little problem. How do you put a guy in prison? Are the Secret Service guys going to have to share a cell with him? It's a little odd. That prosecution in New York is so preposterous. But it's got like, and you know, the point of lawfare is even if they can't get a conviction to stick, and presumably even a bad jury in Manhattan is going to say this is crazy. But if they don't and they convict them, presumably, eventually, a court of appeals will say this is nonsense. But in the meantime, they've already succeeded. The point of lawfare is the process. You know, whether we get the conviction or not is just gravy, icing on the cake, right? One of the founders of the 65 Project, which is the group bringing these bar complaints against lawyers all over the country, he said, our goal is not just to get them disbarred, but to make them so toxic in their firms and their communities that right-wing legal talent will never take on these kind of election challenges again. Now think about what that means. If no lawyer is willing to stand up and challenge illegality in the election, that clears the path for future illegality in elections as far as the eye can see. And we will have lost our sole ability to control the direction of our government. That's their goal. They said it publicly. And it's working. How many big law firms will want to take on any of these cases? And by the way, it doesn't take much to think, all right, what if you decide to represent a pro-life group who's been falsely accused of obstructing an abortion clinic? And you're in a big firm and they're going to go after you for your bar license if you take on that representation. Or how about parents complaining to their school board about nonsense that's being shoveled down their kids' throats in school? and they get prosecuted as a domestic terrorist. And which law firm's going to want to take that up? Look, Shakespeare addressed this a long time ago. He's got a wonderful quote. Everybody misunderstands it. What's the quote? You all know what I'm talking about. The first thing we do, we kill all the lawyers. Most people just think that means lawyers are bad. We ought to get rid of them all. No, the quote is by a guy, Dick the Butcher, who's planning and plotting an overthrow of the government. And they're worried about if they put in this tyrannical government, the first thing we have to do is kill all the lawyers, because it's the lawyers that stand up to that. Right? The 65 Project is aimed at preventing lawyers, scaring lawyers. And I think, look, I'm a little old college professor, except I've now got a national platform thanks to Liz Cheney and others, and I won't shut up about it. So they need to take me out to scare the heck out of every other lawyer that would stand up. But courage is contagious. Jaden Rodriguez's 12-year-old courage is contagious. And the more I stand up and show that I'm not willing to back down and bend the knee, the more other people are willing to stand up as well. So that's what I think we need to do. Yes?
I think you might have answered my question, but as far as proving the election was fraud and corrupt, we have to prove it before the next one so that it doesn't continue. Is that right? So setting precedents?
That would, people say, why don't you just move on? Isn't there a group based out of Michigan here called MoveOn.org? People say, why don't you just move on? I said, because if they get away with it then, they will double down and do it again. It's important to shine the light on that. Partly to figure out what the tactics were so that we can take actions to stop it. They'll come up with new tactics. But by learning the tactics and identifying what went on before, maybe we'll be a little quick on our feet and be able to call it as it's happening the next go around. And I hope, there are a lot of people working on it, I hope they're putting an infrastructure in place that will actually do that. Because you can bet if what's going on that they cannot possibly allow themselves to lose power, because the next regime will hold them accountable. And so they will put everything they've got into it, and we've got to rise to the challenge and meet it. If we are a free people worthy of the name, we will do so. Okay. One more question? Or we
Two questions.
Two more questions? Yes.
I'm Patty McMurray with the Gateway Pundit, and I appreciate you being here. I just wanted to ask you if you're familiar with the GBI Strategies story that
which one?
GBI Strategies. It's a leftist organization that was funded by Joe Biden's campaign and Gary Peters' campaign in Michigan. They dropped off between 10 and 12,000 registrations in an office in Muskegon, and the clerk reported them to the police. There's a Michigan State Police report and a Muskegon Police report. There was an investigation that ended up leading to a multi-city investigation across the state where GBI Strategies / Empower Michigan was involved. They were actually sending these registrations from a hotel in Auburn Hills, which is on the other side of the state, to multiple clerks across the state. The story broke in the Gateway Pundit, and it went absolutely viral. People said, finally, we have evidence of voter fraud, mass voter fraud. Yeah. The investigation was turned over to the FBI, where it went to die, obviously. The investigation was turned over to them because the FBI told them that it had become a multi-state investigation. So the reason I bring this up is because that's real evidence of voter fraud, mass voter fraud in Michigan, right? That a real live investigation was happening. And then we have people like Craig Mauger, who's in the back here, from the Detroit News, whose only response to that investigation was to publish a press release from Dana Nessel that was filled with mostly lies and errors. So how do you combat that when you don't even have a single journalist in the state of Michigan who's willing to investigate an actual police report? There were people, I was interviewed by Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon and Dan Bongino, spent an extensive amount of time on this report, yet reporters in Michigan are just responding to whatever the Democrat Attorney General tells them to say.
Yeah. So the one thing I want to correct is you said that not a single journalist is reporting it, because you did. Yeah. You did. used that report as evidence in my California bar trial, which the judge proceeded to ignore. It said I was committing moral turpitude by saying that there was election fraud. And she didn't rebut the evidence. She didn't say it was not credible. She just ignored it. This is the tactic. Just ignore the evidence or say it's been debunked, like they did with the 2,000 mules evidence. And it's debunked. You get somebody say it's debunked, and then nobody feels like they got to talk about it. Our press is falling down on their job. I used to call them the mainstream press. I don't anymore. They become the propaganda press. And if they're going to retain or recover any measure of credibility left, they need to investigate these kind of things and do an honest job doing it rather than cover it.
I just want to make one more point. This investigation took place 1 month before the 2020 election, and neither Dana Nessel nor Secretary of State Benson told anybody about this, including the clerks. And the clerks knew, other clerks were getting these same packages, but they were not informed by our Secretary of State that this scheme was taking place across our state. And so, these electors that they're saying knew there was no evidence of mass fraud. Well, our Secretary of State and Attorney General were hiding evidence, Craig Walker, of mass voter fraud in our state. So
we had in Wisconsin county clerks being directed to doctor evidence by filling in names that were missing on absentee ballot envelopes. That was illegal. It was evidence tampering. No charges have been brought against any of those people as well. So one of the things I think we need to do, we don't have control of the Attorney General's offices in these states, but we do have control of a lot of the district attorneys in these states. And I think some of these district attorneys need to step up and start bringing charges.
My question is about the election that's coming up in November. So we know that all these different frauds, none of them have been fixed or anything like that. So what can we do to overcome the fraud and actually win Michigan in November? Do you suggest more absentee ballots and early ballots to Republicans play on that battlefield in your opinion?
So you have to play with the cards you're dealt. And I would like to get rid of absentee ballot, mail-in balloting altogether. But the one thing you can't do when this comes down to who can collect more ballots is put all your efforts into one day when they're doing it over 35 or 45 days. Because it's a labor-intensive thing. So you gotta play the game. You can't play it the way they're playing it though, because they find ballots that don't exist from people that don't exist. If you do that, I guarantee you your Attorney General will move swiftly. So you gotta play the game legally and collect as many ballots as you're lawfully able to do until we can get this ridiculous policy changed and go back to the Constitution's language, which is election day, not election baseball season.
Thank you, that's wonderful.
Okay, last thing so I ran out of envelopes out there on the table. Thank you all very much for that. But for those of you that didn't get an envelope and would like to help with our legal defense fund, you can go to givesendgo.com/Eastman. And you can make a donation there, or there's also an address where you can mail checks. You can send prayers there. And what I consider to be equally important is you can read about articles that I think get it and understand what's going on, because I use it as a bit of a blog and I post updates. And there have been a couple of really good ones this past week about lawfare that I've got in my latest update. So please visit that site. Do what you can to help us. Or the other people, the electors here. I did a fundraiser Zoom call for the electors here a while back. Help them, because what's going on with them is a travesty. And the people that are accidentally on the front lines of this thing need your help, because it's expensive to hire competent lawyers. So weigh in. Help them fund their legal defense fund. Don't make them take it out of their kids' dinner table or college education. Help them, because they are on the front lines for you right now. And do what you can. We can all do something along those lines. And thank you all very much. Thank you.
the table is out back, and if you'd like to make a donation to Dr. Eastman, that'd be wonderful, or to Michigan Fair Elections, or to Stand Uppers.
Patrice,
Yes.
I just was asked a question by someone that they wondered where they can watch a video of this presentation tonight.
Oh, it will be on Rumble, I believe. Midwesterner is recording it live, and they will post it on Rumble.
Rumble and YouTube.
Rumble and YouTube.
Oh, and YouTube?
Actually, Kyle, do you want to tell us where we'll find it? I'm sorry. I'll tell you, we'll post it though. We'll post it on MichiganFairElections.org, so you'll be able to see it too. Thank you. Good question.
So did you learn something? Did it piss you off? Are you even more pissed off? And are you asking why hasn't anything been done? Well, I'll tell you why nothing's been done. It's us. We have to get involved. Politicians don't fear us until we show up en masse. That's the only way that it works. They're not afraid of the judges. They're not afraid of the courts. They're not afraid of anyone except us. And it's time that we start doing our part. That concludes today's show. We'll be back tomorrow with another one. And don't forget the real podcast where I'm screaming and yelling and bringing you the guest and all of that. That happens on Monday, May 20th. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
CramerSez is everywhere.
Twitter, Truth, Instagram,
And always on America's fastest growing free speech platform.
CramerSez Social.
Make your free account today
At CramerSez.com.
CramerSez.com.
You're watching
CramerSez.